Thank you. And since the commission is together for the first time, all of us, I just want to start from the left to the right and just reintroduce yourself so everybody's familiar with whom's sitting up here.
Well, I'm Prescott Mayor Phil Good, and I will mention the fact that Peter Krupnik is not in attendance today, but he is excused.
I'm Gary Beverly. I work on the CWAG Executive Committee and lead the Public Policy Committee. And I'm glad to be here and help out.
I'm Bob Recker, past Prescott City Councilman, 2001 to 2009. Made it through two terms. Wow. So here I am.
My name is Jim Lamerson. I'm the chairman of this commission. Past city councilman, past chairman of the board of the Prescott Chamber of Commerce, and past downtown commissioner when Mayor Sam Steiger was mayor.
My name is Jillian Haley. I am born and raised in Prescott. I currently own Haley Construction Company with my brother, Alan. I'm on the chamber board. What else? That's good.
I'm Gary Warup, chairman of Greater Prescott Outdoors Fund, which won recently the highest honor in the United States through League of Cities, which is a gift to the city of Prescott.
And I'm Michael Taylor. I'm a local architect.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And one of the things that we kind of need to have input on is what does the policy mean to the citizens of Prescott? I realize that the council has its own committee where they review the policy and give their input, but the mayor thought it was a good idea to also include the public. That's one of the elements of his campaign that he ran on. He wanted community input on something as important as our water. So with that, I'm going to turn this meeting over to Leslie, who is our water guru for the city of Prescott, and she's going to give us an update right after I do the roll call. I think I already did it, though. I'm here, Gary Beverly's here, Jillian's here, Peter Krupnik, Robert Rucker, Michael Taylor, Gary Warab, and Phil Good. So we have one excused absence. And so now we'll open up with the discussion items with Leslie.
Okay, we are definitely having a little bit of computer difficulties, but our IT department is on the way. So good morning, Commission today. It's good to see you here. And you do have a first order of business, the approval of minutes from June 21st, 2022. Can I send that back over to you?
Thank you. Did anybody here have any conflict with what was presented to us in the minutes from last month's meeting? With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last month.
So move.
Second? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, moving right on.
Okay. And for the benefit of those up at the dais, I think it's also important to know, so I'm your staff liaison, Leslie Grazer, which was already introduced. I was introduced. Mary Kay Wisenand, am I saying that right?
Wisenand.
Wisenand, oh, so close. So she helps us with all the preparations and keeps us all on track. We also have our Public Works Director, Mr. Ashley Couch. And we also have another water resource project manager, as I'm named too, Kay Sido, is here today too. So now all faces are familiar in names. I do have a PowerPoint for you today, and there's a hard copy in front of you. So we're going to have to work from that for a while. If you don't have a hard copy, let me know. Does everybody have a, okay. Okay, so we'll start on slide 2, which your agenda calls for a briefing of select state of Arizona water history and its relation to the city of Prescott water supplies. So we felt this was foundational information. Many of you have a lot of information and experience in the area, in water, in your businesses, in your activities. However, I wanted to bring you kind of the genesis of how does a policy even come to be with water. And there's quite a bit of history that happened along the way. So let's see. As you can see on your slide, it's an ocean of water information. So similar to our last meeting, there was a request to also include Arizona Department of Environmental Quality information as well. And being that we have 20 minutes for this, I had to make some real tough choices, and what we came up with was a timeline. So turning to your next slide, slide 3, we'll start in 1864. And why this is important is this is when Prescott becomes a territorial capital. So you'll see in these slides that I marked things in blue, which are Prescott specific. And then in the bigger picture, in the black font, you'll see the things that were either Arizona or more than Arizona was happening at the time. So let's look at the Howell Code, and it's the doctrine of prior appropriations. This is the first in time, first in right language related to surface water. The city does have surface water within their portfolio, and we'll look at that more down the road, but you can see how this starts to move through time. In 1903, the Salt River Project was created, and why that's important is because they're a downstream water right holder, and a lot of their rights are senior to Prescott's. So at that time, in 1903, Prescott was piping water into town from Del Rio Springs. So there was a wooden pipeline that they were working on to bring water in. They were also using water from the courthouse area. They were also using water from the local creeks. As you can imagine, as creeks swell and drain, they can grow bacterias and such. So we had the local doctor at the time who was saying, you know, we need to be watching for those different waterborne illnesses, and we need a better supply. So they kept working on supplies. I mean, goes way back in time, probably before 1864. In 1919, the Arizona State Legislature, so this is bigger picture again, adopts a public water code. And what they did was they were requiring people to apply for well permits. Oh, excuse me, I jumped ahead. They were to apply to obtain a permit to appropriate water, surface water at that time, before they put it to beneficial use. So that was one of those keystones again. In 1919, Prescott was adding supplies from the Thorbeck Ranch Springs area, so that's what you know as Goldwater Lake now. So there wasn't a dam at the time. It was just springing forth. It was coming off the mountain front, and that was another supply that the city felt they could add to their to help serve their needs, basically. Looking to the next slide, slide 4, is 1922, the Colorado River Compact. So this is when we start talking about Colorado River supplies, and it actually occurred much sooner. But the compact wasn't, Arizona refused to ratify it until 1944. So at that same time, Prescott was, taking care of their own needs and said, okay, we're going to build Upper and Lower Goldwater Lake. And that's where you had a more consistent supply. You also had surface water treatment happening at that location. If you go there now, it's now open. The lower lake is open for hiking and things like that. The surface water treatment plant is gone. Okay. We keep moving along. In 1945 to 48, the Arizona State Legislature adopts the first groundwater code. And this is where it's a required registration of wells and prohibited from drilling. So I'm going to step out of the way for just a moment. Okay. Can we take a 2-minute timeout for?
Leslie, use the middle one.
Use the microphone?
Use the middle.
Oh, the middle one. Okay. Rotate. Because the timeline was so fun. Let's keep moving along. Okay. So we're on 1945. The Arizona State Legislature adopts the first groundwater code. So this is where wells need to be registered. And there's a prohibition on drilling new irrigation wells in critical groundwater areas. So you know what's going to come next in the PowerPoint here is the Prescott Active Management Area. So they start, they're going to have to make some big decisions statewide regarding water supplies. And so this is when the first groundwater code is adopted. And at that time, the city once again is struggling with water supplies. And so they have Leeds and others prepare a report for them that's the development of water supplies for Prescott. And what they come up with, the bottom line here, is they said, okay, negotiate for CVID water. That was going to be called the Watson Lake Project. Okay, your other option would be improve your supplies coming from Del Rio. Or you could also look at the Little Chino Artesian area, so Little Chino Valley. It was not incorporated at the time. Town of Chino Valley was not incorporated. So it was just called the Little Chino Valley Artesian area. So we keep moving. So we have a huge jump. And this is I red flag things in your notes so you could see, once again, the genesis of how we get to this policy. Did it come out of nowhere? No, there was a lot of history that leads to this kind of thing. So in 1980, this is where the state became even more serious and said, okay, we're going to adopt the Groundwater Management Act. You're going to see more of this in a picture format, so you can see the arms of all things that happen from the Arizona Department of Water Resources and being basically in charge of whatever the legislature had put into the Groundwater Management Act. And in 1980, you're getting really close, I can see.
Is that what you want on the screen?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So in 1980, thank you so much. See, everybody has a skill set, and mine is not IT, and that's why we have people who have those skill sets. Okay. I think we're in full form now. Maybe. It's not talking. The little mouse is not talking with the screen. I turned it over, it was on. It's the mouse.
I'm trying to find them.
Stick around, Jared. We're almost there.
PowerPoint up there.
Yeah. Drag it up.
What's that one? I need that one. I need that first. Yeah, just minimize that altogether. She needs this. Yep, she needs that pulled up. Yeah, but you got something on that.
Okay. I think so. Okay. So where have we been? You zoom through time. Okay. So the Prescott AMA. Let's see if I can click it on here. Okay. So the key point of this this portion in time is that the Arizona Department of Water Resources, through the Groundwater Management Act, established many things, and one of them was active management areas. So the Prescott Active Management Area came to be. So what's really important here, and it's confusing for a lot of people, and I don't think it's confusing to anybody sitting up here now, but we're going through it for the sake of the public that might be joining us as well and others, is that the Prescott AMA includes, let's see, I can't use a pointer. Oh, look at that, there we go. Okay, Prescott Valley Incorporated area, the Prescott itself, City of Prescott, Chino Valley up in here. It also includes Dewey Humboldt. They don't have a polygon identified for them. And then the gray that you see is a layer that we had for another purpose that's showing all the parcels as things are broken down. So you can see very large sections, still as sections, and then things that are broken down much tinier into residential lots. We had cut this off probably for a project we were doing, but as you can imagine, Prescott Valley also has that same kind of layering available. So it was not intended to leave them out. It was just what we had available at the time. Okay, going back up. So 1991 was also pretty critical. So within the state statutes, originally it had moved to there would be no transportation, meaning no water movement would happen between basins, because we had Scottsdale tapping into a west side basin trying to bring water into Scottsdale at one time. However, the Groundwater Transportation Act did get modified, and it did allow for the transfers ultimately from the Big Chino Basin and 4 other areas. Not into our area. Our area only gets Big Chino potentially, but you had to meet a certain criteria within statute for this. So I bring this up once again because you have Big Chino in your portfolio as well, and it might be something you want to discuss as part of your policy discussions here. So at that time, about 1990, the city of Prescott was looking at about 26,400 people, let's say that. They were also serving outside the city limits, so that number is probably a little bit low if we looked at it from a service area versus just a city population. Let's keep going. Oh, you know what? Critical. I want to make sure I mention this, and I slipped my mind. So in 1991, but earlier, too, the city, when we looked at the Colorado River Compact, efforts were made, and the city had an allocation of Colorado River water. And so the tie-in here is that was relinquished and sold to Scottsdale, and in turn, Arizona legislature provided for language in Groundwater Transportation Act, so you would have the availability of neighboring groundwater supplies. So had to stitch that together. I apologize, I missed that. Okay, so moving forward in 1993, groundwater replenishment. So this was another action that happened at the state level. And it basically is for recharge. And as you know, you have a recharge facility. You were actually using reclaimed water on a golf course long before this ever happened in 1993. You were also recharging long before there were permits required and things of that nature into Granite Creek. But it became formal at the state level in 1993. 1994 is very critical too. Yavapai Prescott Indian Tribe settlement. So you have a requirement within your portfolio that they are the first served and they get what they need right off the top. That settlement was required in order to be able to seek Big Chino water supplies, one of the many criteria that had to happen. So you had to have a settlement in place. Continuing on is the adoption of the Assured Water Supply Rules. So what that did, it established the criteria that developers and municipal water providers must meet to demonstrate a 100-year water supply. So moving ahead, 1998. The 1995 rules were not in effect at that time here in the Prescott Active Management Area. It wasn't until 1998. The Department of Water Resources, ADWR, declares the Prescott AMA out of safe yield. And so we've heard that definition probably many times. More water is being withdrawn than is naturally and artificially recharged. So with that declaration, then they said, you are now subject to the Assured Water Supply Rules. And that changes the trajectory again a little bit for the city on how they're going to manage water supplies. So right off the bat, they knew back in 1944, they had a document from Leeds that said, you should be talking to the irrigation district. They have reservoirs. That could be your backup supply. So 1998, the conversation starts again, and actually that's when Watson and Willow Lake reservoirs are acquired for their water rights. So we use terms like it's severed and transferred from the irrigation company to the city. And we'll look at that a little bit more too, actually, in some coming slides. In 1998-99, so back at the state level again, the governor's drought emergency declaration goes into effect, and it hasn't been lifted. We still have that in place now. That time is when the city said, okay, if we're going to be declared out of safe yield, we want to be an assured water provider. We're going to get that designation of assured water supply. So your first designation in order is, and your purchases of these water rights related to CVID, Watson and Willow, occur. So let's look at the first decision in order quickly. What was happening was they said, okay, we know you're pumping roughly this much water to serve your current needs. This is your groundwater block. Remember, a portfolio is going to contain many different sources, and they all have to work together. So in the past, we've always talked about water as integrated. You know, it's not just like, you know, we can only use this, we can only use that. It's, you have to look at your whole picture. But based on state law, and this is what gets tricky, is there's things you understand from your science experience, and there's things that happen at the legislative level, there's things that happen legally, and so trying to intermix all those things can become challenging. But what happened was the state said, based on their rules, you're going to show us what your pumping records are, and we're going to say, okay, you roughly have this much water that you serve, so we're going to basically grandfather that in. At the same time, the city says, and we also have treated effluent. We would like to have that recognized. Oops, that was a big jump. Let me see if I can get back to it. We also have treated effluent. We would like to have this pool available, and the idea was to grow on that water supply. All right, let's jump back. 2004, things are still very interesting in the area. The city purchases Big Chino Water Ranch. So that's through that Transportation Act that we looked at earlier. The city and Prescott Valley enter into an IGA for those supplies. So as you know, there's almost a 50-50 split. When the water comes in, they get about half. We have just a little more than half for use into the future. Of course, Big Chino is another topic for another day. Can't cover it in 20 minutes. Going forward, in 2005, the city said, oh, we need our second decision in order. And so here is the visual on it again. They beefed up their alternative water supplies. Over here, you can see this number change as well. It increased. So why would it increase? So because they couldn't hold back development when the Assured Water Supplies program came in and you were declared out of safe yield, they said, well, if you have, it was called the Plat Rush, if you have developers who are ready to go, then we are going to be willing, if you show us a preliminary plat, when that goes to final plat and your council says, we believe it's in substantial conformance, we haven't had big changes, then you will come to us and say, you have your preliminary plat, this is staff of the city, preliminary plat, final plat, and now you're going to seek a groundwater allowance increase for that subdivision. So that's why you're going to see this number change. We still have that feature active within your current decision and order, and we would see that in your one that's under review right now. Now, alternative water, significant jump here. So even though you bought Watson and Willow Lake water rights and did the Severin transfer to own that instead of having it be under CVID's name, you didn't have it in your portfolio yet. So you bring that in at this point right here, surface water supplies for storage and recovery. And that has its own set of rules that we have to follow. Direct delivery, you made this clearer in your 2005 decision and order, your second one. This number bumped up a little bit because you've grown. So now you're taking in more water at the wastewater treatment plants. You can send more to direct delivery if you have a contract in place. Or if it doesn't get used annually, you can save it over in your long-term storage credits, which can also be used for development. Okay, let's jump back to where we're at. And then in 2009, you have your third decision in order. So these decision in orders of assured water supply, there are requirements within that legal document for when you update it again. When do they look at it again? Because everybody, you'll have that in this community. I've heard it many times. Well, they get this one document and then they're done. No, we have to keep going back in and proving that we have an assured water supply, continuous, physically, and legally available. So the third decision order starts looking like this. So we have another little bump here, very small bump in the groundwater. So your alternative is still looking the same. It's broken down into 4 categories, but now you want to say to the Department of Water Resources, we're ready to have Big Chino in our portfolio. Now the reality is you might have been ready, but then the economy tanked in 2009 timeframe. And so everything was kind of put on hold. You also had, with this third decision order that is still active right now, you had legal challenges. We were in legal challenges for 2 years trying to resolve those legal challenges. What resulted was a partnership of SRP, City of Prescott, and Prescott Valley. We decided that everybody wanted to put their monies towards science and figuring it out, how we were going to protect downstream water rights, how we were going to have the ability for using water supplies for our growing communities, I guess I should say. And I don't know if there's another piece to that. I think the bottom line was we moved from a legal stance to a scientific stance. And many of you know that we are in that right now, continue to be. Okay, I think I can jump to the next slide. Sorry, real touchy mouse. So we have a huge jump in time, 2009, and now we're going to look at 2019 because I need to wrap this up because we only have 20 minutes to try to convey as much as I can to you as to why you're here and what we're asking you to do. In 2019, the city simplifies its water policy and amends codes. So this is what I had asked, somebody had asked me, what does that policy look like? So in 2019, it's actually occurring throughout 2018 into 2019, you resulted in a policy that was this page and this page, these two pages. And it's very tiny, and we're not going to read it all. But basically, you had a scope that said this policy is intended to be a long-term policy to direct city staff in managing the city's finite water supplies and to assure potential applicants that they can rely on a consistent set of rules when applying for water service. This document applies to all new applications for water service of any type. So when they say any type, they mean residential, commercial, industrial, whatever the case may be. Then you have a blip on the water conservation policy that's going to be followed, the tools that would be used potentially, the water connection policy, water application procedures. So there were two, one for inside city limits and one for outside city limits. Okay, so that is the end. Let me make sure. Oh, no, that's not the end. There's always more. Okay, so 2019 to 2021. So now you're seeing, in Arizona, across the Southwest, in 2021, the Bureau of Reclamation, sorry for the abbreviation there, Bureau of Reclamation, declares a Tier 1 shortage on the Colorado River operations. So even though we know that we're not receiving Colorado River supplies, we saw on the timeline that those were sold. There was a trade in legislation to get water out of the Big Chino instead. If you're having a drought in the Southwest, you're having a drought potentially in Prescott too. It's just, your surface water supplies could be impacted. Things could be challenging for everybody. You're not an island. And then significant volumes of water were placed into contract, and existing large contracts were amended during that time period. Further, in 2021, the city files its decision and order modification to ADWR. And as of when I was updating the slide as of today, I put it as of today, we are still under review. So those charts that I was showing you, what your portfolio looks like, that whole thing is under review right now at the Department of Water Resources. In 2022, here we are. The city returns to a 2019 water policy, using it as a base to make amendments and amend city codes. The policy goes into effect May 25th, 2022. Mayor Good forms the Water Policy Review and Monitoring Commission. And here you are. I don't know if that was 20 minutes or less. I'll have to check my phone. But we have a couple more slides, if you'll indulge me, because I'm hoping this shows you how we're getting to where we're at. Why are we here? So if we take from that timeline, 1980, the Groundwater Management Act, apologize for having to make this so abbreviated, but it had many things that it did. It talked about forming AMAs, and this is where your safe yield goal comes from. It talks about management plans and how you're going to conserve each decade a little bit more to make things work for a growing population. There's going to be adjudications. How are you going to resolve these surface water rights that are in courts? So the Department of Water Resources is a technical arm for the courts providing different information. I lost my pointer here. Okay. Let's go up to the recharge program. This is why you have a facility with a permit. You have storage permits of what kind of water you can store there, and you can store effluent and surface water, and you have recovery well permits. Where can you recover that water in the future? And last, here we get to our chain. Assured Water Supply Program went into effect. The city said, okay, if we're going to have an assured water supply program, we want to be in charge of our buckets of water. And decision orders were the direction that the city went. That would be different from your neighbor, Prescott Valley, who says to the developer, please provide us a certificate of assured water supply. So they either have to go out on the market and get groundwater rights and have those converted for use for development. They sold their effluent supplies to a New York company. They have to go entertain discussions with that New York company for effluent supplies to support the development. Your community took a different path where they said, we are putting all our cards on the table. We're acquiring supplies, And this is how we get tracked, basically, by the state in a 1999, 2005, 2009 decision orders. 2009 is where we're at now. And I'm actively working, as well as Kay, on the 2021 modification with a team of consultants to bring you through that. So out of that is, if you have a water supply, how are you going to manage it? And so this is, the city has since 1999 through 2022, has management policies. And there you go. That's how you got to where you're at today, in the shortest. So, I'm not sure where we're at time-wise. Okay, I've gone over a little bit, but I'd like to pause and see if there's any questions, if the chairman would like to entertain any questions, or if you'd like to move ahead and start digging into this policy.
First, I would like to, again, thank Mayor Good for showing up at this commission meeting. But let's move this way if there's any questions. Gary? Bob?
I have one quick question, just to make it clear. The town of Prescott Valley cannot give a permit to the developer for water without the approval of ADWR. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, yes. So if it's a new development that they haven't had on the books, then
Okay.
yes, they would have to come in with a water supply. If it's a lot of their development, their plats were platted back in the late 1990s, and so now they're just coming to fruition. So sometimes that's very confusing, because somebody says, this is new development, and they say, no, we actually planned for this through certificates from way back. But if it's something brand new, it doesn't have a preliminary plat yet, then it has to go through getting a certificate.
ADWR, okay, thank you.
Jillian?
Not right now.
Okay. Okay. All right, proceed.
Onward,
Thank you.
okay, staying on time. So this moves you to your your third agenda item, I believe we would call it, discussion, review, and monitoring of the policy. So we have allotted about 30 minutes or so, it might be a little bit less. But we gave you last time and said, start looking at this policy, read it over, tell us what you're thinking. And these were some of the leading questions that we developed to see if that would help kind of bring everybody onto maybe a common ground to start the discussion. So we said to the commission, to identify your path and products. How will you define what makes the document effective? So if you're reading through it, for example, and you say, it could be, well, for this period of time, it seems to cover that period of time well. If this is intended to be out to 2032, maybe it's not effective, and maybe it needs to be more robust. So there's not a right and wrong here at all. It's an open discussion of what you're seeing. We'll also look at which parts of the document do you plan to focus on to review and monitor. As you probably heard me say last time, was I don't know if we can review everything in there and be ready for some initial thoughts for the council in September. But if you have certain things that you say, wow, that seems critical that we review that a little bit more and we monitor it, then we can do that. So the last two questions, what do you propose to do to monitor these parts? As a reminder from last month, and it's amazing, it was a month ago, is some things are going to be more conducive to a write-up. Other things are going to be more conducive to a table or a graph. So we just want to start thinking about those. Here again, nothing has to be decided today. We're just throwing things out, and I'm listening, and we're capturing everything.
Leslie, I have a question, if I may.
Yes. Oh, can we go ahead?
Yes, you may ask your question, Gary.
Thanks. So, and years ago, and Jim's very well aware of this, we passed the aquifer protection fee. It was a watershed improvement fee. Whatever we're going to do in the future is going to cost money, I'm sure. So I'm not aware of where that is now, and if all the people here are even aware of what that is. But it was 75 cents per metered water user, and my math is nowhere near accurate how many millions are in there now, or if it's even available. Could we get an explanation if that still exists and what it is applicable for, if it would be something that could be used in the statement of where monies come from for the future of whatever we recognize?
Absolutely. So we can note that today. We probably won't go into the details today, but it does still exist. And we can bring that back and note it on our list of, what things did you bring up that you're curious about, and how does that weave in or not anymore? Is it important to be in the policy, or is it actually housed in another fashion and we're comfortable with it that way, kind of thing? Is that all right?
Again, nothing is done for free, so if we do have to look for monies, if that's applicable, I'd like to have that brought up.
Sound good?
Thank you, Gary. I do have kind of a question too, especially when it comes into water conservation, because about the same time that Gary was referencing, we came in with the conservation measures, and I would like to get a qualification at some point. How much water have those measures actually saved the citizens of Prescott? That would be something I think the people of the city have a right to know, and we have the responsibility to give them that information.
Okay, we can add that to the list. I'm going to see if I can end the show real quick and move to,
We conserve that.
or maybe not.
Chair?
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Would the suggestions that we have be submitted in writing to the commission, or are they going to be just done verbally here?
I think they can be done either way. I don't think we're going to ignore anybody. I would prefer to have them in writing to where
Great.
we can actually put our finger on the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Rucker?
Thank you very much. In addition to what Gary was talking about, how about if we get an update on unpaid balances that are still owed for the Big Chino Water Ranch?
Oh, yeah.
And
not
I know we're still paying on that balance, and I don't know if you guys have brought that up at council meetings here recently or not, but, we still got a bond out for that, and I know it's getting close to being paid, but I don't know what the balance is, so if we could add that into, that might be interesting.
Okay, and some of these are kind of around the policy. It sounds like you feel like you need some more support information. Today, we're going to try to get into the document a little bit more, too. So the bigger picture questions, I think, are great. But let's see if we can also get into the document itself a little bit. So I'm going to pull it up on the screen. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
I had a piece of paper here ready for notes, but it doesn't seem to show up on
I have a
this, so-
question from the mayor.
As I mentioned at the very first meeting, the primary responsibility for this commission is to monitor the effectiveness of our new water policy within the city. Some of these additional concerns about the Big Chino Water Ranch and other areas are kind of beyond the scope of what we're currently working on.
Okay.
So if we can focus on the effectiveness of our water policy and how to implement that and make sure it's doing what it's intended to do, then perhaps we can move beyond those areas to recommend some broader issues or policies that, quite frankly, I'm in the process of establishing the first working group with Chino Valley, Prescott Valley, the Yavapai County, and the city of Prescott to analyze some of the effective policies that we already have that can be adopted throughout the AMA to maybe reduce the overdraft. So I'm going to be working on that, and I have my first meeting scheduled with those representatives in that area next month on August 16th.
So may I ask a question, Mayor?
Yes, you may ask a question of the mayor, Gary.
Okay. So
Gotcha.
what I'm hearing is that there will be another committee that would be a moving forward from this committee with more solutions than we would be bringing up here. Is that the intent of that committee?
Well, that working group's intent is to try to adopt policies that are consistent throughout the municipalities and even the county so that we can impact the Prescott AMA in a broader sense. So if we have this particular commission focus on our city's policy, making sure it works as well as it can be, I'll start working with this working group, and then perhaps some of the solutions or recommendations that come out of this policy can then be applied to that other working group. Does that make sense?
I'd like to think it really does, because it's so important, and I'm relieved that you brought that. I wasn't aware of that. I did spend time with a couple of county supervisors who wanted to talk about that, so I'm relieved that you're moving that forward, because quite frankly, I'm very proud of this document and to Representative, but there's huge amounts of solutions that are not in here, and I'm looking for the avenue where that could be presented. That's important to me.
Okay, well,
I
that's
just want to
good.
be able to advance the slides.
Okay, Leslie,
Sorry, we're,
I just have.
I have a question from Jillian now.
yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. In the presentation, you mentioned moving from a legal space to a scientific space. Could you elaborate on that and what tools within that scientific space are currently in use? I know you mentioned the worm. Is that something that we can use for hard data?
So backing up, because, yeah, I spoke really fast. The moving from the legal framework to, is it behaving? Okay, thank you. Go sideways, okay. So fun. We always have a different operation system going here. We used to pull things up, and now we have to pull it to the side. So, surprise. So moving from the legal to the scientific. The city's always been in the scientific realm. The other partners have always been there too. But when you start fighting over water, it goes into the legal realm. And so we wanted to pull it back out of that legal realm into the science. And that's what we did with SRP, Prescott Valley, and Prescott with the Big Chino. Now, in your policy, you do have, and we can open that up in just a minute or two here, you do have what's referred to as the water resource management model. And that is, that was intended to be a long-term planning tool. So we were going to take data in, watch what our community was doing, keep some of our current practices, and see how that behaved into the future. It has been stated to be the one that tracks everything, but, well, let me back up. It was for long-term planning, because the last time the city was looking at long-term planning, it was static. So they came up with one visual. I said, I think you need something more robust. We need to have something that can bring in all sorts of data sets. We can grind through them. We can show them visually in graphics so the decision makers and the public and ourselves can see, what does this really mean? So we needed that kind of tool for the future of the city. We also needed it for our decision order of assured water supply. So I think what you have kind of in front of you now is not a legal realm necessarily. We're not trying to wrangle something out in courts. What you're trying to look at is how do you help plan for the future of Prescott water supplies? And one of those tools should be your water resource management model. The kicker there is that, we load in data after the year has passed. So we can run projections, but if you think it's going to tell you like split second what's going on, it's not. But it does have such a variety of information that it is valuable. So if, say, for example, in 2022, we know people are connecting to the city system, they're using water. We make the assumption, and that's where you have to be careful with assumptions, that they are going to use a certain amount of water and not use more. If they use less, we're good, But it's not until 2023 when we start pulling the data and bringing that into the billing, from the billing back into this model, that we can see impacts. Your countermeasure, of course, at one time was contracts. So if you said you had a certain volume of water and you were willing to entertain more development, then you would look at that part of your setup and say, okay, well, we believe we have this much water, and we are going to subtract, that development meets whatever the criteria were that you expected, and we're going to go ahead and issue out a certain amount. And then in time, we'll have to see if that plays out the way we thought it would.
One more. Sorry, I had one more question.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, then let's go ahead.
Okay. I guess my question on that is just that it seems to be a tool that's measuring actual data, even though it's not a real-time data measurement. It would be at least, what, if not this, what other tools are available to monitor on a scientific and really we're collecting factual data? Is that something, is that what the purpose is?
Yeah, I think the distinction,
And then
yeah, you're trying to make.
Yeah, and then also, for how many years is that data available? Because if we at least have a basis to start from, then maybe we can see where we're going, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what you're getting at is, that's where I recommended to the city, we need to make a lift. So we knew what we were putting in contract, we knew what was in our DNOs. We also knew their community potentially was using less than we had been authorized for. But until you have it all crunched, it's caution. It's also a very cautious thing, even though if you have, say, this worm and it feels like it's real data, the cautionary aspect is that you haven't tested this against the aquifer yet. So the Department of Water Resources says, okay, we're going to say you've been pumping this much. So this is your groundwater block. Okay, you have this surface water, and you say this is what you're recharging. Generally, what happens if in 5 years we recharge much less of that surface water? What happens if our effluent changes in some way? So that's the gap that you have, is that even though they said based on the legal side, you put together these numbers, we put them together in accordance with law, have you then tested it against the aquifer standing? And so that's where groundwater flow models come in. That's the next leap that I was hoping the city would make. Once we had a worm running and we had scenarios in place that we could share, then we would test it back against the aquifer. And in another realm, that's happening as well with our decision in order of assured water supply. It's at the department. We've asked a local firm to do our groundwater flow model, and they're going to check us on this and see how it tests against everybody else who's pumping. It could be the town of Chino Valley, it could be private well owners, it could be a private well that's held by an industrial user. We have more to learn. So I hope that makes sense. It's just a lot to pack into one. So I don't think this, we never want to move away from data, but it's good to know which realm you're working in and how strong that realm really is and knowing what it knows.
Thank you.
Okay, you got your question answered?
Absolutely.
All right. Move ahead, please, Leslie.
Okay, where are we at? We had 10 minutes left. So let me do a quick next slide, and then we can look at the policy if we have a little more time, because we're really trying to feed off of your brain power here, is tell us what you're thinking. So I'm going to tell you first about your next meeting materials. One, we did have a question come if the commission could determine if a time change could occur from meeting at 11 to 12 to 10:30 to 11:30. So is that something you want to try to entertain right now?
Does anybody have a problem changing the commission meeting from 10:30 to
11 to
11?
10:30.
Or 10, well, whatever it is.
Yeah. 10:30.
Good for me.
All right, sounds like that's okay.
Done, thank you. Okay, first big decision. Okay, and your homework, so I hope this helps, is that, review the notes. We were going to distribute what we can. We haven't had a lot of your feedback yet, but we can work through you emailing us, whatever works. Review the notes, these right here, and the policy. And if you can follow up on kind of giving us your first top 3 or 4 related to how would you define what makes the document effective? Which parts of the document do you want to focus on to review and monitor? 3 and 4 is extra information for us, but I'm going to be watching that in time.
I do have a question as we're moving forward.
Yes.
With regards to policy, and has to do with, we enter into water service agreements with developers, we enter into water service agreements with various different municipalities, et cetera. My train of thought, that's a contract. And what happens, what validity or what capability, legal cause, does the city have if people aren't honoring the contract that they entered into with the city of Prescott regarding our water? That is something that I would like some sort of qualification on from legal department. What is our remedy for areas that are not doing what they agreed to do?
Okay, and we can not table it, but basically put it on the notes and bring it back at the right time to discuss that more. I mean, as there, you have a whole list of things you could give us in discussing this. So we appreciate everything that you're providing us. I think it's important to know that the city somewhat moved away from contracts in those last 3 years. They said, and even now the policy says, if you're within this worm, you get water, pretty much. You know, there's certain caps and things like that. But probably the process that you remember has changed fairly significantly, where it's not everything that comes in, if it doesn't meet these qualifications, goes into a contract. So we have, IGAs that have been built and all sorts of different things, and some very large contracts. So we'll see if we can sort that out as well, so there's understanding.
Would appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
So I'm going to try to move to the policy itself.
Hold on one second.
Fine.
Yes,
Oh.
Gary.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to agree with Jim's point and question about the legal things. There are metrics within the water policy where the same question applies, so I just wanted to support that request.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Leslie.
Okay, so we are now on the website where the policy resides at this point. And while it's configured, and you probably know this already because you've looked through it, is page 1 through 14 is basically background information. 15 through 18 are policies, and then starting at 19 through the end are attachments. So we gave an example, is this policy effective, let's say, in providing background information for the reader? Is this policy effective in looking at short-term or long-term water needs for the city? Those are some of the questions you might want to ask. So this is all background. Is there something in here that needs more, maybe like member Haley said, I'm not quite sure what's the worm doing. Does that need more explanation potentially in this document or in another realm? I'm going to move from system water losses. This is, let's see, rebate program savings. That question came up today. We do have that tracked in the policy. We can talk about that more, so no worries there. I'm trying to get to our GPCD. So this was the example I gave you last time, was are you looking at the policy and saying, wow, I think it's really important that we track GPCD? And I can give you the background on that, and we can continue to track it as we were required by the state of Arizona when we file annual reports each year. Or if you need to see this quarterly for some reason, we could develop that data set so you could see it more frequently because you think it's really critical. I'm not saying whether it is or it's not, I'm just giving examples. When you get into down here, your policies, there might be one in here, and I'm not going to pick on any policy of any of them, but you might say, oh, this policy, I'm not quite sure what it means, or I think that's valuable to track. So we're hoping that you will, a little bit today in the time we have left, which is, I know that we have one member that needs to jump, so feel free to jump if you need to jump. And email us, I guess, at this point, things that you feel are important. I'm also sure that the chairman will entertain probably a few more ideas on the document itself, if you have time.
Thank you. Well, one of the things I want to make sure is that understanding the whole premise of this commission, it's a mayoral appointed commission. Are we getting to some of the information, Mayor, since you've given us the pleasure of your company, are we getting to some of the information that you wanted to hear?
Well, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you.
Establishing understanding of what the policy is, what's intended to do is the first step. And then being able to measure whether it's actually generating the results that we hope for, and how could it be done better. Are there errors? Are there gaps that need to be filled? Are there recommendations that would make it even more effective?
Thank you.
That's the focus.
Okay, Leslie, you can,
Question there.
Jim?
Member Beverly.
I'm sorry.
So could you give us how we would submit, where do we submit written comments, and what's the date you would like to have those?
Yeah, let me see if I can go back to that.
And then will those written comments be distributed to everyone on this group?
Yes, so if I could make it quickly come back up, which I'm not going to probably, is in your PowerPoint from today. Last slide, it says, review the notes that will be distributed on the following questions and rank the items 1 and 2 with your top 2, or well, 3 or 4 is what I offered, and return to staff liaison Mary Kay by August 5th. So that gives us time to compile. So at this point, I'm interested in whatever you can send me. So if you have certain thoughts on things, we can stitch them together, okay? And if you don't like these first 2 questions, if you don't think that they're helpful in getting you where you need to go, you can propose another one. But just throw me a few things, 3 or 4 on 1 and 2, and then I can see how to stitch us all back together for the next meeting and see the bigger picture of questions that you've brought up.
I want to remind everybody about the open meeting law and open communication on different issues. So there's some things that we just can't share with everybody once you've done it. So if you can comment on that comment.
Sure. So it's related to quorum. If you have a quorum of people and their decision-making on the side, that's not okay. If your quorum can also be happening in email. So that's why you send things directly to Mary Kay. So your thoughts go directly to Mary Kay. I try to prepare everything and help guide for the next meeting. So I think that's basically the gist of it. So
Thank you.
Okay.
And do you have anything else that you would like to discuss
No, sir.
today?
That clock says we should be wrapping up.
Okay. Having said that, are there any comments from my fellow commissioners with regards to today's commission meeting? Okay. With that, I'm going to adjourn the commission meeting. I want to thank them again, the mayor, for being here. And I want to thank every one of you for taking from your time to serve your fellow citizens of Prescott. Thank you very much. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, commission. Have a good afternoon.